Welcome to The Art of Likeability, ranked one of the top podcasts in the world. In this podcast, you'll discover how to leverage likability to build stronger relationships, lead more efficiently, close more sales, and keep customers happy while increasing success in your professional and personal life. Let's jump in with your host, Arel Moodie.
What's going on, Art of Likeability family? Arel Moodie here, your host of the Art of Likeability podcast, where we bring to you the most incredible content ever created in the history of the world. Quote from my mother. So you know it must be true, because if she says it, what else? I mean, come on, people. This is what we're here for. And today, oh my goodness, we have a very special guest. And when I say special guest, and I love all of the guests we have on our show, but this particular guest, Mr. Victor Antonio, holds a place literally in my heart that no other human can hold. And I'll explain why. So I'm going to go into his formal background and who he is and why he's so great. But what I'll say is, way back in the day when I was like 22 years old, Victor came to speak at my college, and I came up to him and I said, "Man, your presentation was incredible. I'm going to get my thing." And I still remembered his thing about the heat-seeking missile, and every day you don't move towards your goal, you're moving away from it, and you got to get closer to it. Like, to this day, I still remember, what he said in his presentation. And I came up to him afterwards and I said, "Yo, Victor, this was incredible." I said, "Watch out for me in 20 years, man. I'm going to be doing what you're doing." And, he said one of the most game-changing things in my professional career, which was, "Well, why don't you just do it right now?" He's like, "You can speak to people from a big brother perspective. Why don't you just start now?" And I was like, man, it just literally changed my behavior. It changed the way I saw myself. And I started professionally speaking then, and it's been a passion of mine and something I've been doing for over 11 years now. So I owe a lot to that one conversation and to the man with us, Victor Antonio. So let me tell you a little bit about him so you can understand not only why he personally means so much to me, but why the world is so impressed by him. So Victor grew up in really one of the roughest areas in Chicago. And that didn't stop him from earning a Bachelor's of Science in Electrical Engineering, getting an MBA, and then building a 20-year career as one of the top sales executives, and becoming the president of a global sales and marketing company, which did about $420 million in gross sales. As a vice president of international sales at a Fortune 500 $3 billion corporation, he was selected from over 500 sales managers to join President Advisory's Council for Excellence in Sales and Management. This dude has shared the stage with Rudy Giuliani, Zig Ziglar, CEO of Intel, CEO of FedEx Kinko's. I mean, dude's the author of 12 books on sales and motivation. Golly, this dude's spoken in Europe, Asia, Saudi Arabia, Australia, all over the world. He is the go-to guy for understanding sales influence and how to understand why people buy, why clients and how they buy, and how you can leverage that for your success. So this is one of by far the most exciting interview, because this man has changed my life and has changed so many. Victor, thanks for being on the Art of Likeability podcast, brother.
Dude, I love that intro, man. I'm going to just keep replaying that over and over again if I ever have a bad day. How's that? Thank you, man. Thank you.
Dude, you're just an incredible guy, and I appreciate you in so many ways. And I still reach out to you to this day for advice and feedback, and I appreciate your willingness to help. And I think a lot of that, your willingness to help, comes from your kind of humble beginnings and growing up in one of the toughest cities in America. Why don't you tell us a little bit about, how you grew up and how that's kind of shaped and influenced what you're doing now?
Well, my family's originally from Puerto Rico. So they moved to Chicago in the late 50s. I think my mother had a third grade education. My father only had a fifth grade education. They worked on farms. So, they came here like many immigrants, seeking opportunities. So we moved to Chicago, and I had what I always call black collar jobs. Those are jobs that were so disgustingly dirty back in the day. I still remember my father coming home after working at a factory, and he was just like blowing out his nose all the time. It's just black stuff came out, and it was just like, it was a hard life, man. The food stamps, the government cheese, the powdered milk, all that. And around the area where I grew up, which is where the Cabrini Green housing projects, the Humboldt Park area, were back in the 60s and 70s were just, just on fire, if you know what I mean, in terms of crime, violence, and all that, drugs. And so people always ask me how I maneuvered out of that. And I think my mother always tried to keep me on the straight and narrow. And she was always like, go to school, get the education, get the job, get the degree, get out of the hood. And so I think that shaped me in a way that, I understand people who are struggling. So I have pure empathy for people who are struggling. And if I would fast forward my life, up to the time we met, for example, I knew at that point that every time I would ask other speakers for help on what I should do, I would not get a lot of help. And I told myself I would never be one of those speakers that wouldn't stop for a moment to help another speaker. You know what I mean? So, humble beginnings, I understood the empathy of pain and trying to get out of the hood. No different in business, right? We're trying to get out of the hood also, right? Where we're trying to do better things for ourselves. So I remain grounded and humble, but I always remember nobody wanted to help me. I will not do that to anybody else. So if people ask me for advice, I always stop and give it to them. So.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that about you. And I can tell you what, man, how the actions we take influence. I made a decision from that day. I said, if I ever became someone who people wanted to ask for help, I would do exactly what you did with me. And, I've spent 4 or 5 hours after presentations just sticking around answering questions. And, you were kind of my role model, if you will, of how to treat people, which it's just, again, man, I'm very grateful for you. And I'm grateful that even today, as you are doing so well, traveling internationally, you were on a TV show as a host because you're so good in that kind of behavioral change that you still stay, humble enough to make a difference. And I think that really separates you from many other people, especially in the sales world, where in the sales world, it can be extremely, it just has a reputation for being grimy and gross and just gross, and you really make it ungross, and I'm curious to know, you're a master of sales influence and understanding how people buy. How does the whole grimy factor, factor into sales when you're teaching people, when you're helping people? Like, is that their biggest hang up? And, how do you help them get over that?
Well, I think a lot of people have, as you say, those negative connotations, the visual analogies of the slick salesperson always lying to you, trying to grab your money. The Glenn Ross, ABC, always be close and in your face, boiler room mentality, or, Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman, life sucks as a salesperson. But in reality, I view sales as a noble profession. I mean, I think it is one of the I don't want to say the noblest profession, but it's up there. When I tell people that, they kind of tilt their heads. What do you mean by that? Think about this for a second, Arel, because I think people don't understand this. One, you can have the best product or service in the world, but if nobody knows it exists, it doesn't matter, right? So you came up with a great product. It can impact society. It can help society, but you just can't get the message out. Who do you call? A salesperson, right? And so a salesperson brings to market, in my opinion, obviously with the help of innovators and marketers who actually put the product out there in the first place, but it's the salesperson that walks into a company and says, hey, you need this. And this will help you reduce your costs, increase your revenue, or expand your market share. Now, let's slow the movie down for a second. If I walk into a business to sell something that I know will create value within the company, that's a win-win. You will pay me and you will get value, right? That's the first benefit. Second, because your company is growing, that means you can not only keep your employees, you can probably hire more employees. So if you had 100 employees and now your revenues are going up, well, those 100 employees, behind them are 100 families, which means that they will benefit from the value of the product or service you offered. But on top of that, because I sold you the product, Arel, my company is also benefiting and my company is growing, and we have 100 employees, which have 100 families. So when I look at sales, I think of it as a noble profession because nothing happens until something is sold. And when you sell a product on value, because it will create value, it will help the other person, it's win-win. That's why I think it's a noble profession, because we help companies stay in business. If you sell value, you help companies stay in business. And they employ people who have families, so forth and so on. So that's how I view it. I don't view myself as a shyster trying to sell you something you don't want. I view myself as somebody selling you something you need to help you stay in business.
Now, what I tend to notice when I speak to people and I share that with them, I see this kind of glazed look that kind of goes over their eyes. And then what I think is happening in the background is they go, yeah, but, I don't want to sell. I just want to make a really great product and it's so good that people just want to buy. Like, I want like a Facebook. Like, Facebook doesn't have to sell Facebook. I don't want to have to do, like, I understand what you're saying, Victor. I just don't want to have to do it. What do you say to that?
Well, look, I mean, the Bureau of Labor Statistics did an interesting study in 2012. And what they found out is that when they looked at people who are employed, 1 in 9 people, 1 in 9 are employed in the profession of selling, right? Which begs the question, what about the other 8 of 9, which are not employed as professional salespeople? Well, what they found out is that when they kind of zoomed in on that, is that the 8 of 9 spend 40% of their time influencing, persuading other people. What does that mean, Arel? They're selling. Do you know what I mean? When somebody tells me, I have this thing when somebody tells me, I don't like selling, I'm like, shut up. You sell every time. I don't know if you've seen my analogy where I said, you've been selling as a kid. Look, when you were born and as a baby, you were bawling, right? You were crying. That was your first sales pitch. You just didn't know it. You were basically telling your mother, hey, I'm hungry. I was selling you on the idea that I'm hungry. As you got older, you started begging, Mommy, can I have a cookie? Well, guess what? That's a sales pitch, right? And you put on the sad face just to get the cookie. That's a sales pitch, right? As you get older, now you're in your teens, you want to use the car the weekend. What do you tell your parents? Look, if I clean my room and I get good grades, can I use the car this weekend? That's called bargaining. That's also known as selling. And you're married, Arel. I'm sure when you approach your wife for the first time, what were you doing?
I was definitely selling. I was definitely selling. Yeah.
Yeah, everybody's selling. And so when people say, they're not in sales, I think what they're really saying, though, to put a serious point on your question is, they're afraid of selling. It's more of an introspective look at themselves. I don't want to sell. I hate selling because of everything I have in my head that selling is. And I see that a lot. I mean, that's like 90% of the people I talk to, nobody likes to go out there and have to sell a product. Why? Rejection. Nobody wants to be rejected. Nobody wants to be told that their idea isn't that good. And, the ability to close a deal requires you to be a little, not aggressive, but assertive. And some people are just not comfortable doing that. So when people say, I don't like selling, it's more of them holding up a mirror to themselves of who they are and how they want to be. It would be great if I could put a product out there and it just sold by itself. That'd be great. But that's the exception, not the rule. So whether you like it or not, whether you're in an interview or selling a product or service, you got to sell.
Yeah, it's so true. There's 2 things that really rocked my world, because when I started out, I was one of those people. I hated selling. I got nervous. It was honestly because I didn't know what I was doing, right? And once you learn, it completely changes it. But ideologically, the 2 things that changed my view was, one, exactly what you said, right? Like a teacher trying to get students to pay attention and learn math, they're selling them on why math is important. It's everywhere. Like everything we do, influence, persuasion, it's a skill set that if you really truly master, regardless of if you're a manager, a florist, a carpenter, really doesn't matter what you do. Influence and sales is part of your life. So you have to understand that.
Yes.
And, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that, and I don't mean to interrupt, but I wanted to get this point across, is that I wish they would teach this stuff in like high school, and even college. That influence and persuasion is a big part of your life. I would swap that out with some archaeology course and take that instead, because I think the ability, this show's called The Art of Likability. Well, what is likability? The ability to get people to like you, right? People buy from people they like and trust, right? We've all heard that. So how do you build likability, right? Believe it or not, that's part of the sales process. And I think people need to understand that to be likable, I don't want to say it's formulaic, but there is a formula for it. If you want to be likable, there is a way to be likable. And that helps you sell yourself or your product. I guess I wanted to tie those 2 together, that selling is about likability as well.
Well, it's 100% because, if I don't trust you, if I don't like you, if I don't want to be around you, it's kind of like equivalent. I know you have been approached by these people probably a million times. You're in the airport, you're heading from one gate to the other, and there's a person who's like, hey, do you want this credit card? And they're like kind of stopping you. And, 9 out of 10 times people go, no, thank you, no, thank you. So when they think of sales, they're thinking of that person who's like interrupting their day, who's trying to convince them to buy something that they don't really want or need. But one of the things you said, which really has impacted my philosophical perspective with selling, is the idea that, yeah, nobody really likes to be sold, but everyone loves to buy, right? Like if I'm going to buy, like if I have money and I want to go buy some new shoes and my objective is to buy some new shoes, I'm trying shoes on. I'm like, which one's just gonna make me look fly? Which one's gonna be comfortable? We love buying. And that's why consumerism is such a huge part of kind of at least the American culture. You talk about, understanding why people like to buy and then influencing that buying decision. Give us a little bit more like of a 10,000-foot view of that philosophy and then some ways to implement it.
So you said something interesting, and I'll answer that one. But let me answer the first thing you said, that, the credit card thing, you're going through the airport and, people are interrupting your day. Well, the reality is salespeople are interrupters. Do you know what I mean? You're doing something that is inefficient, and I have something that I know is efficient, but you're too busy in your grind. So to some extent, we as salespeople are interrupters. But we're interrupters when we see that you're losing money. Do you know what I mean? I like to call it, interruption with care. You know what I mean? If I know you're losing money, I want to say, hey, Arel, you're doing this wrong. Let me show you what I got. And so part of our job as salespeople, again, when you're selling a product or service, is to interrupt people. But again, if you don't like the word selling, I said use the word sharing. And I always give this example. If you went last night, you and your wife, you went out to a great restaurant, Arel. You went to the restaurant, it was great. I mean, you walked in, the ambiance was perfect. The music was like the right volume, just enough to be in the background, but also like loud enough to have polite conversation, if you know what I mean. And then the dinner, oh my God, you looked at the menu, it was wonderful. The prices were good. When they brought out the food, the presentation was exceptional. Everything, the adornment, the garnishment, everything looked great. The service was there. It's impeccable. Even on the way out, I mean, you got the valet service. They kicked you out of there. And you had that great experience. The next day, if that, you would be on the phone telling somebody about this great restaurant, right? You would call your friend up and say, hey, dude, you probably called me up. Hey, Vic, look, I found this restaurant last night. You got to try it. Now, and you'll go on and on and on and on. Now, you've done two things. One is you've called me to interrupt my day, to tell me about this great restaurant. Why? Because you see the value in it, and through your enthusiasm, I can tell you see the value, and you, as a friend, want to let me know. And I use that as a simple example to say that, yeah, again, salespeople are interrupters, but I like to say they're interrupter with value. They'll interrupt you with more value, and because sometimes we are just too busy, Arel. You know what I mean? We're just too running and gunning all the time that we just don't know when to stop. The problem today I see in selling is that people interrupt you with no value. They don't know, they don't know your business. They don't know what you're about. They haven't taken the time to understand what you do, how you do, and why you do it. And they just want to push a product. That's not selling. That's really just pushing. So I just wanted to just draw that distinction. When you interrupt somebody, it's because they're doing something wrong, or you can really help their business grow. And I love that. And so, to answer your question about understanding how people buy, it's really fascinating how, once you understand a person's buying decision, you can interrupt them less. You know what I mean? You're less, obvious about the interruption. And examples I give are like, for example, as I'm talking to you, right? I know that if I adjust my speed, my volume to you, subconsciously, you'll start liking me. I also know from a liking perspective that if I ask you questions, Arel, and I just keep the focus on you, and I want to find out more about you, guess what? And you'll like me. Even me saying simply, Arel, I really like you, causes you to like me that much more. It's, again, neuroscientists have proven this. I mean, it's just the way the brain works. And so there's different ways to get people to like you. But again, you liking me, Arel, is one thing. You liking me enough to buy my product is another. And I think that's where we get confused. I can like you as a salesperson, but convince me that the value is in the product is another thing. And I think that's where people get messed up. I think they think it's all about relationships, being nice to people. And maybe 10 years ago, when we were in a better economy, you could have said that, or maybe 15 years ago. But in today's market, Arel, You can like me, I can like you, but I still have to justify the cost of paying for that product or service you're selling.
So when someone is using that, likability factor, if you will, to leverage the relationship build, where is it that most people mess up or don't understand how to kind of get to the next rung on the ladder, which is really, okay, now, hey, you like me, that's great, but how do you like me enough, like the product enough, like the solution enough to want to kind of invest in it or purchase it? What is the stopping point that gets someone from that relationship rung to the being able to sell effectively rung?
I mean, that is a great question. So it's a loaded question. It's a great question. So let me just answer it two different ways. One is that I'll look at it from a B2B perspective, business to business perspective. That's kind of my niche, right? Not so much business to consumer, but business to business. The problem with today's market, Arel, is that you can like me, I can like you. But a recent study by a company called Circle Research came out with a number that says, on average, for somebody to sign off on a deal, it requires 7 people today to sign off on a deal. I mean, that's a lot of people you got to get to like you. So in other words, you and I can like each other, but I got to get 6 other people to like me as well. Okay. But even if I got you to like me as well, I still have to, how do I say this? Let me just take a step back. People today are more insecure about where they put their money. Money's tight. We don't know what the economy is going to do. Profit margins are thinner. So when you're asking me to make a decision, Arel, I'm buying your product or service, I'll say something like this: dude, I like you. I really like you, but I'm having a hard time justifying this. And where people get stuck, going to the next rung, is they can't help them justify it. They can't quantify the value. And that's where they can't turn around, these people you're selling to, and justify it within their organization. So for example, I tell you, buy this product, right? Buy this wonderful microphone that I have right here in front of me. Great, you like me, but Victor, it's a $100,000 microphone. Help me justify that. Most people can't do that. And the reason you're asking me to help you justify it is because you have to now turn around within your organization and sell it upward to the other 6 or 7 people. And that's why I think a lot of salespeople fail. They don't know how to justify it. The biggest reason being, one, they don't understand the company's business. They don't understand their struggles, and they really don't know how to quantify the actual value of how this product's going to increase revenue, reduce costs, or again, expand market share.
Yeah, that is that's so good, right? Because if you understand the person you're speaking to isn't an island, right? They're not siloed in their decision making, that even the top decision maker has to run it through a person. Even consumer-wise, I can imagine someone has to run it by their wife, their husband, their brother, their sister, their housemates. It's really not siloed. So understanding that, hey, I may love you so much as a person, but I have to understand when I go back and I'm presenting to my committee or to my group, they weren't on the phone with me. They don't know who I am and how great of a person I am, right? So we have to understand how to move people toward understanding that value. And then what I also like you said is understanding like them. What are their buying decisions? What are their needs? So for a lot of people who want to say, okay, all right, I'm catching this, Victor. Like I'm getting, I'm building the relationships with the person I'm connecting with. I'm really wanting to focus on that value proposition. How do I better understand what is the decision-making process? How do I better understand the flow of whether it's an organization or a business or whatnot, what is it that means the most to them? Like, how do I, as someone who wants to be of influence, get kind of a peek behind the curtain, if you will?
Great question, Arel. Dude, this is probably one of the best interviews I've had in a long time, man. I congratulate you for the great questions. Think of the iceberg. The iceberg analogy. And because I think this really encapsulates it and gives you the visual of what I think is the problem in today's selling world. The top 10%, people will tell you, I'm looking at your product features, I'm looking at the benefits, I'm looking at the advantages, and I'm looking at price, right? And so we as salespeople focus on, proving that we have the right features, we got the benefits are there will be a gain, and that we have good pricing in the market as compared to our competitors, right? And so we're always saying as compared to our competitors. And so we as salespeople focus on the 10%. But the problem is, it's what lies below the water, the 90% of why they're not really buying. And this gets into the psychology of why they don't buy. And if you understand this, then you can probably sell them more effectively. And that is, let's say, for example, I am selling you, I'm going to call it a $500,000, $500,000 printer, right? One of these mega printers. Now, you look at price, you look at the features, the functionalities, you look if it's a fit for your company. And again, you're looking at analyzing what I call the top 10% surface stuff, and we sell on that. But the reality is, almost like at a subconscious level, the 90% below the water is the following. You, Arel, have to put your name on that piece of paper. Now you're thinking, okay, and let's say that, for example, you're the chief technical officer. And now, okay, if I decide to buy this, how does that impact my operations? How does that impact how it's going to integrate with some of the other stuff if I have to put it online somehow? By the way, I also have to retrain my salespeople. What does that mean for my standard operating procedures? Do I have to rewrite the manuals? And if we do bring this in, will my production go down? If it does go down, how long will it go down? Can these guys really, put it in place within the 2 days they say they could put it in? If not, what are we going to do in the meantime? On top of that, how's that going to delay, the current orders in the system? Blah, blah, blah. You get the idea?
Mm-hmm.
And so that 90% is the fear of making the decision. And this is what we don't address in the sales process typically. This is where a lot of salespeople fail. And unless you address that in the actual presentation, for example, I would say to you, Arel, one of the things you're going to think about after we get, after making the buying decision is you're going to say, how do I train my people in getting up to speed? Well, let me show you what we've done with our past customers. And I handle that objection. You're also going to be thinking, can we actually do it in 2 days? The implementation, I said, well, here's a couple of case studies where we've actually done it in less than 1 day, half a day or whatever it may be. But it won't take us longer than 2 days. I answer that objection. So in other words, by getting into your psyche, understanding what are going to be some of your, things that'll hold you back, your brakes. If I can address those during the presentation and not focus solely on price, feature, benefit, advantage, then I have a better chance of closing the deal.
Right. You know what? That's such a really, really valuable, and I want to make sure everyone listening right now understands what's happening here, because this is like gold. Like, it's not even gold. It's platinum wrapped in uranium with a little bit of kryptonite dust on it, right? Because it's that rare and valuable. Because if we understand the 10% is what people usually will talk about, but it's that underlying, well, how much work is this going to cost me? What am I giving up? So let's say, for example, you're selling something that's $500. A lot of people immediately start going, well, what do I have to give up? You're telling me all these amazing benefits. Great. But what do I have to currently give up in my life? Or where do I have to access that I don't have access to justify that? And then if I do, what if I'm not going to use it? Oh my gosh, there's software. There's a learning curve. It's not like I'm walking around with 7 free hours per day. I can't possibly. So those are the real reasons people are kind of hesitant. Yeah, that's what and we have to almost jump into the language and jump into that conversation that's happening in their head. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. The example I'll give to tie into that is that, and this is a stupid example, but it really hits home. So I had a leaky faucet, right? And it was leaking from so I opened up the basin in the bathroom, right? So I had a leak at the bottom, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to mess with plumbing, right? So I grabbed a little plastic pail, just like most of us do, just a small little plastic Tupperware thing, and I put it under, and it dripped slowly. So I just I'm not going to deal with that now. A week goes by, 2 weeks, whatever, and that drip gets a little bigger, right? More frequent. So what do? No, I don't fix it. I get a bigger plastic bin, right? And I put it under there as well, right? Mm-hmm. And I go through 3 phases of plastic bins till finally, like I said, a month later, 2 months later, whatever it is, I finally said, you know what? Damn it, I got to fix this thing. I just can't keep coming in here and draining this thing out all the time, right? And so what happens, I go to the hardware store, go to Lowe's, come back, and it takes me 10 minutes, if that, to fix it. 10 minutes, and it's fixed. And I'm slapping myself in the head going, now, why didn't I do this earlier? And that's when it hit me. See, in my mind, when I saw the drip, I associated that with past experience of working on plumbing in the past. Now, this is important because we do this. Something triggers us, and all these negative connotations rush forward and influence our decision-making process. So I saw the drip. It reminded me of all the times I fought with plumbing. Immediately my brain says, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to deal with that. Then what happened over time is that the pain of change got greater than the pain of the same. And I want to make sure you got that. The pain of change was greater than the pain of the same. In other words, this was becoming so painful, I said, you know what, I got to fix it. And so what happens in my brain when I first saw the drip, the perceived effort, the imagined fear of how hard this was going to be stopped me from taking action. And isn't that people today? You show them something and they have this imagined fear of how difficult it's going to be or how the transition isn't going to be that easy. And they'll just what? I'll think about it. I'll get back to this later. I won't touch this now. And that's what we see.
Wow. And you know, when folks are really kind of getting to that past experience, it's so good. And I think about even in the like personal development world, you know, there are a lot of people who like to buy books or, you know, go to courses or, you know, whatever it might be to develop themselves. And there's so many of us, because I'm one of the people who do this, invest a lot in professional and personal development, we'll buy a course and then we'll put it on our bookshelf. And in the first like 5 minutes or 5 days, we're so excited. We look at it like, this is the thing that's going to change my life. I'm going to be so much better, blah, blah, blah. But then it becomes you don't do the work, right? And then every time you look at it, it becomes a reminder that you're not taking action. You're not moving forward. You're not taking this step. And then all of a sudden, this thing that you were excited about then hurts you. So if that's where you're coming from, someone who's selling you a new course, you also have to address that past behavior of, remember that thing that made you feel like you were horrible, you didn't fix it? How do we change it? Here's how we do it. So that understanding of what causes people to be pushed and hesitant and causes them to have negative past experience, whether it's a drip or a software or whatever, is crucial. And how would you suggest someone really start to understand that iceberg? So I'm someone who goes, man, I want to figure out for my people, what is their 90% underwater iceberg? What are some specific strategies or actions I can take to really start understanding what's this unspoken but very powerful internal dialogue?
Let me answer another question before I forget, because it's and I know people listening to this might want to hear this. When I talk about the iceberg analogy, it's not only about thinking about selling a sales product. If right now you're listening to this and you don't have a job and you're interviewing for a job, keep in mind that you're only addressing the 10% in your interview conversation. If you really want the job, you'll address the other 90%. Let me explain. The 10% is, tell us about your work experience. Tell us how you could add to the culture here. Tell us, you've all been through this interview process where you get the basic questions. And if you just answer those basic questions, you're dealing with the 10%. But now let's look at it from the interviewer perspective. Take their point of view, their POV, right? What are they thinking? The interviewer's thinking, will this person fit? And if they do fit, how much training will I have to do? And when it comes to training, can this person really absorb the information? Do they really understand our industry? So if you're interviewing, keep in mind that by raising the objections, and that's one strategy, Arel, by raising the objections that are in their heads, you actually block those objections. So if I'm doing an interview and I know one of the concerns is, let's say, what I call, time to effectiveness, right? In other words, the learning curve. One of the things I would raise in the interview would be, hey, one of the things you might be concerned about, Mr. Interviewer, is, how long it will take me to get up to speed. And I could ask them the question, how long does it typically take a person to get up to speed? And they'll say a month. I said, well, here's some of the things I will do to accelerate that process, and then explain 2 or 3 things you'll do, right? Take additional courses, whatever it may be. But by addressing those things that are below the water level, the 90%, you're now reducing that person's resistance. The interviewer's resistance is going down because you're basically saying, you're knocking down the questions, the concerns, the perceived effort they have in their minds, the imagined fear. And that's one great strategy of how to actually reduce that resistance. I wanted to answer that one, Arel, because I think it's helpful for people who are looking for a job to kind of implement this process.
Yeah, that's actually very, like, I'm thinking about me as an entrepreneur who hires people. If somebody was saying that to me, I'd be like, oh, this person is like an angel sent from heaven to be a part of
Yes.
my organization. And that's
Yes.
what you want to feel like, right?
Yeah. Like, you get me. This guy understands me. He's answering all the questions I have in my head. And I think that's powerful. Now, to answer the question you originally asked is that, if you had these bad habits in the past, and let's say you bought 2 or 3 programs and you just put them on the shelf and you never used them, which happens, then, how do you, deal with it, let's say the 4th time? Now there's a new opportunity. And, to that, I would always say is that if you bought something, you got excited and you didn't use it, I hope that you learned something from it. Why didn't you implement it? But again, I don't like to put the onus on the consumer. I like to put the onus on the seller, because if the seller can say to the person, here's how you're going to use it, here's how you're going to implement it, they're a better seller. If you're a buyer, you remember the torpedo analogy about
Absolutely.
when you go after something, it isn't what you want, but you learn from it, right? You increase your database. And through every iteration, every stupid move you've made, you've actually gained new knowledge. I like to believe that people who've bought 2 or 3 programs in the past have gotten smarter about what they wanted. And I think, for me, a strategy would be is don't buy anything at the event. Now, here's a speaker who sells a product telling you not to buy something on the spot. Because there's cold triggers and there's hot triggers, right? When you're in a presentation, you're hearing the presentation, the presenter on stage is just killing it, saying everything you want to hear, that emotional rush to want to buy the product overtakes you. In other words, you're more emotional than logical. And so the analogy that I once heard was the elephant and the rider. The rider sitting on top of the elephant, rider R for rational. The rational rider sits on top of the emotional elephant. And so what's happening is that the emotional elephant is just moving off in one direction because it has the power to do so. And the rider is trying to reason with the elephant, but the emotional elephant won't hear it, right? And that's why people make snap judgments. But sometimes the opposite can happen. And that is that you're so rational about something that you can't get the emotional elephant excited, so the elephant doesn't want to move. Like, for example, we all know we have to probably eat healthier, right? Logically, rationally, we should eat healthier. But for some reason, we don't do it because we haven't tied it to some emotional aspect or trigger of what we want to do or why it's important to do so. So what am I saying with all this? That you got to find that balance of rational and emotional. And what I always tell people is, don't be in the hot trigger place, move to a cold trigger place. And that is, give it 24 hours before you buy anything and really reflect on it. When I'm at the mall now, I do this to myself. I know I see a pair of shoes and I love shoes and I go, but do I really need it? And then I always tell myself, if I really need it, I can give myself 24 hours. And if I still need it, I go back and get them. And that's my strategy. Don't know if that helps, but that's my strategy. I wait 24 hours.
Yeah, it's a really, really good strategy for making, because then if you rationally feel good and you emotionally feel good, you don't have the buyer's remorse of, oh,
Correct.
Lord, what did I get myself into? I shouldn't have done it, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And, but if, the next day you go, man, I'm thinking about it. I can't get my mind off of it. I want it. It's great. Then you buy it and then you feel confident. You feel good. You don't feel like you were swindled or overtook. So it's actually a really good personal strategy to implement.
Yeah, I think those 24 hours gives you a chance to ask yourself those reflective questions like, okay, I bought 2 or 3 programs in the past. Why didn't I use them? And if I do buy this one, will I really use it? How will I use it? When will I use it? So it allows you for that type of, mental space to actually think about things.
Right. And, if I want to start really, it feels very artistic almost, kind of like you're, using a paintbrush to artistically understand. Because I can imagine, people listening, because I know I was doing this, when you were explaining the hesitancies or the drip example, I was going, yeah, that's exactly how I would have felt, but I didn't know that's how I felt, but that's exactly how I felt. Like, it's a very kind of artistic process. Is there like one paintbrush you can lend to us to help us start painting that picture of what's happening in someone's brain? I know people say have conversations with clients, interview them, but how do you really get people to almost admit or explain something that they really feel, but maybe didn't have the words to express before?
I think when I've always liked point of view, POV, right? If you just take a person's point of view, but I mean, I always say there's a difference between sympathy and empathy, right? And most people are sympathetic, not empathetic. And I think the best salespeople are empathetic. And the analogy I always give is that you're standing on the deck of the boat, right, Arel? You're enjoying the beautiful sunset, God's magnificence right there being witnessed by you, right? As you're standing on the deck by yourself. Along comes this guy, he starts stumbling by you and he goes right past you, goes all the way to the edge of the boat by the banister, bends over the banister and he starts puking his guts out, right? And you stand there and you go, man, that must hurt. See, that's sympathy. Now, if you went over there and you threw up with him, that's empathy. And I think, and I use that analogy because I want people to understand, is that to really understand what a buyer goes through, you really have to be empathetic. You got to puke with them. You got to put yourself in their business. So if I wanted to be, let's say, if you're a speaker, you got a training program that you have, Arel, which you do, right? And I'm a new speaker, right? And I'm a new speaker. I'm sitting there listening to you. I'm thinking of buying your program. And what you need to do for me is, from a speaking standpoint, you need to get into my head, get beyond the price and all the cool things that the package can offer, but also go for that 90%. Tell me about all the things that may or may not go right or wrong. Really get into my head. So when you ask me about what's that one paintbrush, I think the point of view paintbrush is the best, because once I understand how you think, what's holding you back, and sometimes we just don't take the time to do this, Arel. We just don't. We just want to sell something. We just want to talk, but we just don't want to listen and try to understand why won't they buy. And I think being empathetic is the ultimate paintbrush.
Yeah, I think that point of view is so crucial, because I think what happens for a lot of people is they actually look at it through their eyes, through the person's eyes, but it's really through their eyes. They're not really seeing it from their perspective. They're saying, well, this is the greatest widget in the world. And they say, the only reason I wouldn't want this widget is because I'm an idiot, right? Like nobody says that. Like no one says, I'm not buying this because I'm an idiot. So we have to make sure we're not seeing it from our lens through their lens, but we're truly stepping into theirs and understanding, why are they sick? Why are they puking? What does it feel like when I puked last time I puked? What did I wish someone would have done for me that they did or did not do? That really is getting into the process. And I think we all have personal experiences that we can almost kind of pull from emotionally, where I know what it feels like to want to buy something that I'm really excited about, and then ask myself, well, why was I excited? What did the person say? What did they do? Being more observatory, if that's even a word, I don't know if that's a word, observatory of the process. Observant, thank you. Observant of the process versus just experiencing it. And I know you walk people through that whole process of, understanding what's the point of view paintbrush, if you will. What is it that truly are people thinking? What are their decision-making processes? How do they do that? And what's actually cool is, I know you said, you were telling me about this like really intense, like 12 people, 12-step, 12-hour kind of 12 times 12 times 12 thing that you do for folks to really kind of immerse them into understanding other people's point of views, understanding the process, understanding the things that people don't even know exist that need to be addressed. And, tell me a little bit more about what that looks like and who are the people that get involved in that.
Okay. By the way, I just want to put a finer point on what you said, because it was stated so well. And I want to tie it back to the art of likability, because when you can take another person's point of view, you're going to ask them questions that you normally wouldn't ask because you want to understand more, right? And by asking people and really understanding their point of view, believe it or not, it increases your likability factor. Like, I can talk to you and I can say, man, Arel really listens to what I'm saying. And then you're going to ask me questions, Arel, and I'm going, man, he's asking me questions that go below the surface. You know what I mean? In other words, some people just ask you a question, but they don't have a follow-up question. I love conversations where people just keep asking you questions, digging deeper, because that tells me that you care about me. And because I think you care about me, I feel good about myself. Because I feel good about myself, my self-esteem rises. Because my self-esteem rises and I feel good about myself, I then associate that feeling with you, which means every time I see you, I just like seeing you, because I know we have great conversations. And I want to emphasize that by taking a person's point of view, really understanding, who they are, I mean, that really increases that likability. So I just wanted to put a finer point on that because I think that's excellent.
No, man, that actually is absolutely just, that is just brilliant, actually, because when I do feel that, when I go and I meet someone and I go, this person gets me, there's just my desire.
That's the phrase, by the way. That's the phrase right there. This person gets me. That's the phrase.
That's it. That's huge. That's huge.
Yeah, that's when you know that you're fully immersed in the POV, right? The point of view, because that person gets me. He gets it. And I think that's important. And so to answer your question, when I do that, I have a program called the Sales Mastery Intensive, which is 12 people, 12 hours, 12 modules. And I keep it to 12 because, first of all, I want to spend time with each individual person building out their sales process, as opposed to just giving them some template type of training. In that process, one of the things we do is we get into the customer's mindset, the point of view. So what does your customer really want? What's the buyer journey? What are they looking for? What's the, I heard a phrase, I was reading a book, and it said transcend transactional and focus on transformation. And I'll say it again because it's a powerful statement if you really think about it. It says transcend transactional and focus on transformation. And what the person was saying is that, if I just sell you something, Arel, that's just a transaction. And too often we focus on the transaction, trying to, sell something. And they're saying transcend the transactional and focus on transformation. Because when you sell something, Arel, let's say you sell your speaking program, right? You're not selling me the speaking program. You're selling me a transformation. Because with this product, I want to transform into something. I'm going on this journey of I want to be a speaker and I need help, much like the butterfly, to transform. And I love that phrasing because, you think about it. If you get away from trying to sell something, the transactional, and focus on how you're helping them transform, get to where they want to go, then you feel better about what you sell. And that's what I love about the Sales Mastery Intensive. What we try to teach is, take the time to focus in on what your customer wants and where they want to go. What is that transformation they want? Do they want increased revenues? By how much? How can we do it? What are different strategies? That's what they want you to help them with when I do sales training. And so the Sales Mastery Intensive, you can go to the website, salesmasteryintensive.com. It's really powerful for small business owners or entrepreneurs who are out there selling, but simply can't connect. And my paint, I'll use your language, my main paintbrush, rather, is the point of view. Once you understand the customer, it's that much easier to sell to them.
Yeah, and that's really it. That point of view, that understanding, that 90%. There's a marketer who I spent a lot of time learning from, and I actually got to speak at one of his conferences, which was a big honor. Is a guy named Dan Kennedy. And he has a phrase that he calls dog whistle language. Like, if I blow a dog whistle, only a dog can hear it. When I'm speaking from someone's point of view, I'm speaking a language only I'm using the words, the phrases, I'm addressing those emotional points that makes me say I get it. And, to have someone like you walk them through the process is pretty powerful. Now, I know that obviously it's an event. When is the next one you're doing? Because it's not an online course, it's actually in person with you.
Yeah, it's in person. And again, we only have 12 people in the room because there's maybe about 30 minutes of PowerPoint presentation, and it is 12 hours long. And the other 11 and a half hours is really focusing, dissecting, and really building a process around your business. So the next one is April 15th. I try to do one every month. And so and again, they're great because you really get into the details. But by the way, I love Dan Kennedy. I love his material and the dog whistle language. Again, let's tie this back into the art of likability. Is that, do you remember that study by Albert Mehrabian? He said 55% of people liking you, because that's what the study was based on, is visual. 55% was visual. 38% of whether I like you or not was voice, tone, and inflection. How I said it, how fast I said it. And then only 7% was actual verbiage content. So let me run those numbers again, because I want to tie back to your dog whistle statement. 55% of whether I like you or not is visual, right? So we do judge a book by its cover, whether we hate to admit it or not. 38% of whether I like you or not is based on voice, inflection, tone. And then the last part was actual verbiage, the actual content. And so I want to tie the two together because how you say things and how you frame things as you say things will also impact your likability. I just wanted to tie those two together, Arel.
Yeah, no, it's really important because one of the things that I've actually, now you're kind of pulling out some of my secret stuff here.
Oh, sorry.
I actually spend a lot of time working on the way I speak. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I had a very heavy Brooklyn accent. I spoke from my throat and not from my diaphragm. And I didn't understand the differences between nasally speaking and throat speaking versus diaphragm speaking and kind of pushing and rounding your words. And there's something about someone who, when they speak, when they present themselves, there's something about them that commands a room. One of the pieces of advice I was given early in my speaking career was, whenever you walk into a room, right, whatever room it is, everyone needs to know somehow that's the speaker, right? I don't know why,
Sure.
but when they walk, like when you walk into a room, you're wearing a suit, everyone else is wearing a suit, but there's something about you that make people go, that's the guy. Not because they've seen your face on billboards and posters, right? But it's like, there's something about the way they look, the way they're carrying themselves. That's the girl, that's the guy.
I've had that happen to me. I've been walking. I remember one time, the most surprising one, I'm walking in the hallway of a large conference, like arena thing, right? And somebody walks by me, says, "You must be the speaker." And I'm like, "No, I had no microphone, nothing. He goes, I go, "How would you know that?" He goes, "I don't know. You just look like you're the speaker." And to this day, I can't explain that.
Yeah, there's something about just owning it. And, for me, it's, I imagine like when I walk into a room that there's literally light, like I'm kind of like a light bulb that lights up the room. And I imagine it's a dark room and I walk in, there's light. And I don't know what it does and I don't know what happens, but when I visualize like me bringing the light into the room, maybe I hold my chest higher, maybe I walk with more confidence, maybe I feel like I'm doing, a psychological service or a psychic service to the people, but it does really help me kind of own the space more. And then, I'm coming from a place of light and wanting to help people. So it really goes really far. So not just what you say. And, one of the things that I love about you is that you really understand that behavior. You understand what changes the behavior of people to increase them to success. So, as we come to the last couple moments here of our time, give us maybe one last tip or idea about how we can increase our sales, increase our likability, but focus it on that behavioral change. How do you create whether it's a physical appearance, whether it's an action, whether it's a way of being that changes our behavior so we can increase our success in all areas of our life?
I think I would summarize this whole conversation, which has been a great conversation, is that you have to change your perspective on what you think selling is. There's nothing wrong with selling. Again, I think it's a noble profession. And I think if you realize that we're always selling a goal, an ideal, a vision, or enthusiasm, we're always selling something. But if we do it, and here's the key word, with the right intent. If the intent is to help, then there's nothing wrong with it. If the intent is to really help others, there's nothing wrong with selling yourself in an interview or selling your product or service to anybody else. So keep in mind that if your heart's in the right place, intent is in the right place, then it isn't really selling, it's sharing value.
Absolutely, man. And I know that you share a ton of value. You have your own podcast and you put out a lot of content, for people who want to understand where you really are and what makes you think and really get the intent of how great of a human you really are. Tell us about where we can get your podcast, where we can get more of your content, and then one more time about the 12 by 12 by 12 day.
So it's really simple. So victorantonio.com is the website. If you go online, if you go to YouTube, just type in Sales Influence and you'll see my YouTube channel. And my podcast, whether it's iTunes for Apple people or Stitcher for Droid people, just type in Sales Influence. So just those two phrases, Victor Antonio and Sales Influence, and you'll find me. On the website, victorantonio.com, you'll see my program, the Sales Mastery Intensive, and all the information in there. Like I said, if you're in sales, you're a small business owner, entrepreneur, you want to learn how to sell, and you want to spend some real personal time with me. And again, it's 12 hours, 12 people, 12 modules. And it's a long day, but at the end of the day, everybody walks out fully nourished in understanding how they can go to market with their new strategy.
That's it. Well, listen, like we say in every single podcast, the information that was shared with you today, specifically the information shared with you by Victor, will do nothing to change your life at all. The implementation of what you just heard will, I guarantee you, increase so many areas of your life. So I want all of you to think about what's one thing that you got, because there was just tons of nuggets. I mean, ridiculous amounts of, whether it's the point of view, whether it's the understanding empathy versus sympathy, whether it's there's 6 to 7 people who make a decision versus one, whether it's getting 90% below the iceberg to understand what people are saying, getting into that conversation, creating your behavior and your appearance so that you're more likable. How do you get hired, which is, something we all talk about a lot, right? Like making sure we're employed and happy, right? How do we get hired? By understanding what's making the other person tick. There's a million things you could really dive into. I want you to choose the one that you're going to implement immediately that's going to help you get to where you want to go. And that is what's going to change and impact your life in a transformative way. Victor, thank you so much for being here, man. You are a mensch and an awesome dude.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it.
All right. You are awesome.
Thanks for listening. Make sure to subscribe to our podcast, The Art of Likeability, and reach out with any questions you have. Until next time, remember, my friend, you are awesome.